The cold hit first. Not the cold of space, but something stranger, a thin, recycled air that smelled of metal and something faintly chemical, like the inside of a machine that had never been cleaned. Sergeant Dane Rourke noticed it before he noticed anything else, because that was the order in which his training had taught him to process things. Smell, then sound, then sight. Do not open your eyes until you know what you are opening them into. Sound came next, a low hum, deep and rhythmic, the kind that lived in the bones of large ships, not a human ship. Human ships had a rougher frequency, a slight mechanical irregularity that came from the way the drive cores were balanced. This hum was too smooth, too consistent, like something built by people who had never made a mistake in their engineering. That told him a great deal. He opened his eyes. The ceiling above him was pale gray and curved slightly at the edges. The light came from strips along the walls, casting no shadows. His wrists were held down by a faint blue field, not physical restraints, but an energy lock, pressing against his skin with a gentle, humming pressure. He tested it once slowly, then stopped. He had learned what he needed to know. He lay still. The room had four corners, one door sealed, two guards standing near it, neither of them human. They were tall, roughly bipedal, with smooth gray skin and wide eyes that sat high on their faces. They wore armored suits that covered everything except those eyes. Their weapons were held across their chests at a resting angle, but their posture was alert. Professionals, then, not ceremonial guards. That mattered. Dane did not speak. He counted his own heartbeats and let them slow. He remembered the ambush, the supply corridor near the outer edge of Sector 9. His scout unit had been running a routine check on a relay station when the Vathan ships had appeared from nothing, from a fold in local space that his equipment had not detected. It had been fast and precise. His team had scattered. He did not know yet whether they had escaped or been captured with him. He filed the question away. He would not get the answer here. The door slid open with a soft sound, and the alien who walked in was clearly not a soldier. He moved differently, slowly, deliberately, with the particular ease of someone who had never needed to hurry in his life. His clothing was elaborate, layered in dark material that caught the light in faint patterns. He was older, or at least he carried age the way Vathan apparently did, with a slight slowing of movement and a set to the jaw that suggested long experience. He stopped a few feet from Dane and looked down at him for a long moment. Then he spoke. The translation unit on the wall rendered his words into flat, mechanical English with a half-second delay. "You are Sergeant Dane Rourke, Special Operations, decorated 3 times, attached to Admiral Voss's forward command structure." The alien paused. "We know what you are." Dane said nothing. "I am High Arbiter Grell of the Vathan Conclave," the alien continued. "I am going to explain your situation to you because I believe in honesty at the beginning of these things. You are aboard a Vathan vessel. You are unharmed, and you will remain so provided you cooperate. You will not escape. You will not be rescued. What you will do is answer certain questions, at which point your value to us will be exhausted, and we will return you through neutral channels." Dane looked at the ceiling. He said nothing. Grell clasped his hands behind his back. "Admiral Voss values her soldiers. This is well documented. We have observed that human commanders of her profile experience significant psychological difficulty when members of their unit are held in uncertain circumstances. The uncertainty is the instrument, Sergeant, not you specifically. You are a pressure point. Your admiral will not move her fleet. She will not escalate. She will wait and negotiate, and in that time, we will complete our consolidation of the Carvan system. By the time you are returned, the matter will be settled." Dane turned his head and looked at Grell directly for the first time. He did not say anything. He simply looked with an expression that was entirely neutral, and then he looked back at the ceiling. Grell studied him for a moment. Then he nodded as if this confirmed something and left. The 2 guards did not move. Dane began, very quietly, to count the seconds between the guard on the left shifting his weight. The answer was 41. He counted the slight vibration in the hull that came every 2 minutes and 9 seconds, the orbit adjustment cycle of whatever station they were attached to. He noted the exact position of the energy field emitter on the left side of his wrist lock, and the fact that the one on the right was mounted at a slightly different angle, which suggested it had been installed by a different technician or replaced at some point. Then he closed his eyes and slept. Not because he was calm, not because he was unafraid. He was afraid in the clean, contained way that fear existed for him, a signal to be processed, not a fire to be fed. He slept because his body needed it, and because exhausted minds made errors, and because he had already decided that whatever came next, he was going to need everything he had. 40 light-years away in the command center of a human fleet carrier, Admiral Voss read the notification of his capture. She read it twice. Then she called Director Hale. "Phase null," she said. "Dane knows the protocol." She did not raise her voice. She did not sit down. She moved to the tactical display and began to calculate, the same way Dane had calculated in his cell, methodically, without emotion, with the full and certain knowledge that the other side had just made the worst mistake available to them. They had taken a soldier who ran toward problems. They had put him inside one, 3 days into captivity, and Sir still had not slept well. This was unusual. Sir was the Vathan Conclave's most experienced interrogation specialist, a title that carried real weight, because the Conclave spanned 11 species and had been taking prisoners for over 4 centuries. He had worked on Drethian rebels who could not feel pain, on Selkar diplomats trained from birth to resist coercion, on Movil soldiers who communicated in a layered frequency that made reading their emotional state nearly impossible. He had broken all of them, eventually. Not with cruelty, but with precision, with a deep understanding of how minds worked under sustained pressure. He had reviewed Rourke's file 3 times before the first session. Human, male, 34 years old, military background beginning at age 18, multiple deployments, decorated, no family on record, psychological evaluations from his own military describing him as emotionally contained and high stress tolerance. Sir had noted all of this and concluded that the man would be difficult but manageable. Humans were resilient but ultimately predictable. They had strong survival instincts, clear emotional triggers, and a social architecture built around loyalty and belonging, all of which were useful levers. The first session had not gone the way Sir expected. He had begun with sensory modulation, a gentle technique, almost kind by Vathan standards. The cell's light and sound were adjusted on cycles that disrupted the human sleep pattern without preventing it entirely. The temperature was lowered by 7 degrees over 6 hours, then raised by 12 over the next 4. The food provided was nutritionally adequate but unfamiliar in texture and taste. These were all standard methods for producing mild physical discomfort and cognitive friction without causing harm. They worked on every recorded species. Rourke had eaten everything, all of it every time, regardless of taste. He had slept in the brief windows the cycle allowed, with a speed and completeness that Sir found genuinely startling. His body temperature adjusted to the cell temperature changes, with an efficiency that the monitoring equipment flagged as anomalous before Sir realized it was simply the human's physiology responding normally to mild cold stress. He had also, Sir noticed, begun to exercise in his cell. Not frantically. He did not pace. He moved through a series of slow, controlled physical patterns on the floor that Sir eventually identified as a form of muscle maintenance. He did this every few hours for exactly the same duration each time, and then he lay down and was still. The first session in the interrogation chamber had been a conversation. Sir had introduced himself professionally. He had explained that he had no desire to cause suffering, that he was interested only in information, and that cooperation would make the process shorter and more comfortable for everyone. Rourke had listened to all of this without expression. When Sir finished, Rourke had looked at him and said, quietly, Could I get more water? The amount they're providing is about 60% of what I need daily. Sir had stared at him. I'm not trying to be difficult, Rourke added. I just function better hydrated. I assume you want me functional. Sir had approved the additional water ration on the way back to his own quarters, and had sat for a long time afterward thinking about the specific shape of what had just happened. Rourke had not been defiant. He had not been hostile. He had engaged with the interrogation chamber the way a person engaged with a slightly inconvenient administrative appointment, present, polite, and entirely somewhere else in his mind. The second session, Sir had escalated to emotional probing. He brought in the standard relational profile, images of Rourke's unit, his superior officers, his record of service. He asked about the people Rourke had served with. He framed the questions carefully, designed to open channels of emotional investment. Rourke had answered all of them, fully. He had spoken about his team members with what seemed like genuine warmth, describing personalities, shared experiences, individual habits. It had taken Sir the better part of an hour to realize that Rourke had provided nothing, no locations, no operational details, no information of any strategic value whatsoever. Everything he said was personal and affectionate and completely useless. He had spoken about people, without ever once saying where those people were or what they did. The third session, Sir tried time distortion. The cell had no clock. The light cycles were extended and compressed to blur the human's internal sense of how long he had been held. This technique produced significant anxiety in most species. The sense of time becoming elastic, untrustworthy, was deeply unsettling to minds that used time as a structural anchor for identity and hope. Rourke had begun counting under his breath, not frantically, steadily. Sir watched through the monitoring feed as the man lay in his cell and counted seconds into minutes into what he calculated to be hours, maintaining his own internal clock through nothing but attention and discipline. After the third session, Sir sat across from Grell and chose his words carefully. He is not like the standard psychological profile for his species, Sir said. Grell's expression did not change. They are under stress. Stress produces variation. This is not variation, Sir said. He is applying structured countermeasures. I have seen trained resistance before. The Drethian officers had some. What Rourke is doing is more systematic. He is responding to each technique with a specific counter. Sensory disruption, he adapted physically. Emotional probing, he gave me narrative without data. Time distortion, he built an internal anchor. He is stalling, Grell said. Yes, Sir said, that is what concerns me. Grell studied him. Push harder, he will not hold. Sir returned to his quarters and pulled up the monitoring feed. Rourke was asleep again, having eaten his full ration and completed his physical routine. On the wall of his cell, almost invisible because it had been made with the corner of a nail pressed lightly into the surface, there was a series of small marks. Sir enhanced the image. They appeared to be a simple counting system. He had been tracking days. Sir looked at those marks for a long time. Then he thought about a question he had not yet considered. What exactly was Rourke stalling for? On the sixth day, they reduced his food. Not to nothing. Enough to keep him functional, as Sir had recommended. The specialist had pushed back against more severe deprivation, pointing out that a debilitated prisoner was a less useful one, but enough that Dane felt it. By midday of the seventh day, there was a low, persistent ache behind his eyes and a slight unsteadiness when he rose from the floor too quickly. He noted both of these the way a technician noted readings on a gauge. Present. Within manageable range. Adjust. He also had not slept properly in 2 days, because the light cycle had been shortened to intervals too brief for anything deeper than a shallow rest. This was harder. Sleep deprivation had a way of bleeding through all the careful structure he had built around himself, softening the edges of things, making the small sounds of the ship feel louder than they were. He had been trained for this. He had been through it before, in a survival course that his instructors had described, without a trace of irony, as recreational. He had asked for the survival course himself. At the time, He had thought it would be useful. Lying on the floor of an alien cell in the seventh day of captivity, he was glad he had not known just how specifically useful it would turn out to be. He focused on what he could still do. He counted, he listened. The guard rotation had a gap, a small one, born of the overlap between two different shift schedules that did not align perfectly. The gap lasted approximately 11 seconds, occurring every 4 hours, during which there was no guard directly outside his cell door. He had confirmed this over 4 days of careful listening. 11 seconds was not enough to escape. It was not intended to be. But it told him something about how the fortress was staffed, not at full capacity, or the gap would not exist. The ship's hum had layers. There was the main drive frequency, deep and constant. Above it, a secondary vibration that came from the life support processing units, located based on its direction and intensity through the hull, somewhere below and to the left of his cell. Above that, a more irregular pulse that he had initially dismissed as background noise. It had taken him 3 days to realize it was the orbit correction cycle of the station they were docked with, transmitted through the docking clamp into the ship's frame. He had timed it, every 2 minutes and 9 seconds. And the wall flexed. He had found this on the 4th day, pressing his palm flat against the outer wall during one of the orbit correction pulses. The wall gave, very slightly, not a structural weakness, just a point where two hull sections met with tolerances slightly looser than the rest. The kind of thing that would never be noticed in normal operation. During the correction pulse, the flex was more pronounced. He spent time each day with his hand on that wall, not doing anything, simply feeling it. Building a map in his body that he did not write down anywhere. The thing they did not understand about patience was that it was not passive. Patience, real patience, the kind that was built rather than simply practiced, was an active process. It required constant maintenance. Every hour he sat in that cell without losing composure was an hour he had chosen to sit there, which was different from an hour he had been forced to. The distinction seemed small, but it was everything. The moment you stopped choosing and started simply enduring, the clock worked against you. As long as you were choosing, you were running your own timeline inside theirs. On the 8th day, one of the guards made an error. It was small. A moment of inattention during a routine cell check. The guard was looking back at something his partner was doing, and he left Dane's food tray just inside the door instead of placing it in the proper deposit slot and waiting for the confirmation signal. The door stayed open for 9 seconds longer than it should have. Then the guard noticed, stepped back, and the door sealed. 9 seconds, Dane had not moved. But in those 9 seconds his eyes had taken in the corridor outside his cell door. He had seen the distance to the next junction. He had seen the shape of the ceiling mounting communication conduits running left. He had seen, for just a moment, the faint blue glow of a relay junction panel on the far wall. Communication relay. He had cataloged it, filed it, and lay back down as if nothing had happened. From the tray, he ate everything, and he kept the edge of the tray's base panel, where the material had a slight lip that ended in a thin, relatively sharp line. He pressed it under his leg and left it there. That evening, Sir came for another session. Dane sat across from him and answered questions for 40 minutes. He spoke about his childhood in a mid-sized city. He spoke about his early military training. He spoke about the culture of his unit, the jokes they told, the habits they had, the way long deployments changed a person. He watched Sir's expression shift through careful professional attention towards something that looked, slowly, like frustration. "You are very good at this," Sir said during a pause. Dane looked at him. "You answer everything," Sir said. "You say a great deal. I have hours of your voice on record, and I have nothing." "I'm not sure what you want," Dane said. His voice was steady and mild. "Yes, you are," Sir said. Dane looked at the table between them. "I want to cooperate," he said. "I don't have anything to tell you." Sir looked at him for a long moment, and Dane noticed something behind the alien's wide eyes, not anger, but a kind of careful, analytical unease. Sir was working something out, That was not good. Sir, being confused was useful. Sir, thinking clearly was a risk. Dane filed it. He was returned to his cell. He lay down. He pressed his hand against the wall and waited for the next orbit correction pulse. When it came, he pressed harder than usual in a short sequence, 3 short, 2 long, 3 short, pause, repeat. It was a compression of a very old code, one that had been part of human communication for centuries before space travel. He had no way to know if anyone was close enough to detect the vibration through the hull. He had no way to know if the instruments outside were calibrated to pick it up. But the fleet was looking, and Dane knew the fleet, and he knew that Admiral Voss did not send people out without teaching them how to listen for the things that could not be said out loud. He sent the signal for 3 minutes, then stopped. Then he sent his own code, a short sequence that meant, alive, functional, location mapped, hold current position. Then he slept. The first thing that went wrong for the conclave happened on a planet none of its senior members were watching closely enough. The Threll Accord was a neutral diplomatic body, 3 species who had maintained careful distance from both the conclave and humanity for the past decade. They were small powers, individually, but collectively, they represented the endorsement that Grell needed to make his claim to the Carvan system look legitimate rather than opportunistic. He had spent 4 months building the political groundwork. 2 of the 3 had been nearly certain. The third had been leaning. On the 9th day of Dane's captivity, all 3 went quiet. Grell's political secretary informed him of this over the morning briefing, framing it as a temporary communication delay. Grell accepted this explanation because it was easier than the alternative. But Subcommander Ron, who sat at the back of the briefing room and did not speak during it, went to his own intelligence desk afterward and ran a different kind of analysis. Ron had served in 2 wars and 1 cold conflict, which meant he had a practical education in how the human military machine worked. He had read their tactical doctrine. He had reviewed their operations. What he had come away with was not fear of their weapons, but a deep and abiding respect for their patience. Humans, Ron had concluded, did not win by hitting harder. They won by being impossible to finish. So when the 3 Threll species went silent on exactly the same day, Ron did not think, communication delay. He thought, someone spoke to them first. He went to Grell that afternoon and made his case plainly. The Accord's silence is not coincidence, Ron said. The human intelligence apparatus has been active. They have shown the Threll the record of our capture. The 3 species are now calculating whether endorsing our claim is worth being associated with an illegal detainment of a human military officer. Grell listened to all of this with the patience of a man who had already decided the answer. We have not confirmed the capture publicly. There is no record they could show. The humans do not need us to confirm it publicly, Ron said. They need only to show that it happened. They have the ambush site. They have the scan data. They have testimony from the soldiers who escaped. Grell was quiet. We have held this man for 9 days, Ron continued, and their fleet has not moved in response. I said this before and I say it again. That is not patience. That is preparation. Grell folded his hands. Sir believes he will break within the next 2 cycles. Sir also told me privately that he has never interrogated anyone like him, Ron said. That should concern us more than it does. Grell dismissed him, politely but completely. Ron returned to his post. He pulled up the long-range scan data for the sector outside the fortress's detection range and studied it. There was nothing there. That was the problem. There should be drift signals, background traffic, the ambient noise of nearby space. Instead, there was a very clean, very empty section of space. The kind of clean that happened when someone was running quiet, when ships were present but doing everything possible not to be detected. He began composing an emergency alert. He had not yet finished it when Sir appeared at his door. The specialist looked different, not distressed. The Vathan did not show distress in ways that humans would recognize, but there was a quality to his stillness that Ron associated with genuine trouble. Sir came in and sat down without being invited, which he had never done before. "I have something to tell you," Sir said. Ron waited. "In this morning's session, Rourke made a small error," Sir said. "He caught it immediately, but I saw it. He asked about the current date. He framed it casually, a comment about how days blur together in confinement. But I was watching his eyes. He asked because he genuinely needed to know. He was checking his count against something external." Ron leaned forward slightly. "He is on a schedule." "He is on a schedule," Sir confirmed. "I have reviewed his cell behavior since the beginning. He does not exercise randomly. He does not sleep at random. Every behavior is timed. He is managing himself like a system being held in readiness for a specific moment." Sir paused. "I have also reviewed the hull vibration logs from the past 3 nights. There are anomalies, short sequences against the outer wall of his cell. They do not match any mechanical source." Ron closed his eyes briefly. "He has been sending signals," Ron said, "through the hull, on vibration frequencies that our standard monitoring does not scan for, because no species in the conclave uses contact vibration communication. We were not looking for it." Sir's expression was unreadable, but his voice was very flat. "We have been logging them as background noise for 6 days." Ron stood up and moved directly to his alert terminal. How long until a ship positioned beyond our detection range could reach strike distance? Sir said nothing. He did not know the answer, but the look he had brought through the door was the look of someone who suspected the answer was not very long at all. Outside the fortress, in the dark and the silence, Admiral Voss stood on the bridge of her carrier and received the signal analysis from the hull contact listening array they had deployed on the 3rd day. The array was a human invention, a set of passive sensors designed to pick up vibration signals through any hull they were placed against, for use in hostage situations on stations and ships. Nobody in the Conclave database had ever recorded such a device. Nobody had thought to look for one. The decoded signal was short and precise. "Alive, functional, layout complete, shield gap confirmed, 0.8 seconds per rotation, portside upper quadrant. Guard rotation overlap, 11 seconds 4-hour cycle, ready on your signal." Voss read it twice. Then she turned to her navigation officer. "Phase strike," she said. "All vessels, we move in 4 hours." She said it the way she said everything, without additional weight, without ceremony. But the navigation officer, who had served under her for 6 years, recognized something in the way she stood afterward. She did not move away from the display. She stood there and looked at the location of the fortress for a long moment with something in her expression that was not quite a smile and not quite relief, but lived somewhere between the two. She had known he would find a way. She had always known. The alarm did not start as an alarm. It started as a sound at the edge of awareness, a low, repeating pulse from somewhere deep in the fortress's communication network, the kind of thing that gets noticed by experienced officers and dismissed by overtired guards. The 2 guards outside Dane's cell heard it first as a slight change in the background hum of the ship, and they turned toward each other with the small, uncertain body language of people who had not yet decided whether to act. That was the 11-second gap. Dane had been waiting in the dark, fully awake, sitting against the wall, with the meal tray lip in his right hand and 11 days of patience in his chest like a compressed spring. He had heard the pulse too. He had been listening for it, or something like it, for the last 4 hours. When the guards turned, he moved. The energy lock on his wrists had an emitter node on the left side. He had identified it on the 1st day. The emitter needed direct line of sight to its receiver to maintain the field. He had been pressing the tray edge against the node casing during sleep hours, working the material slowly, not trying to cut through it, just scratching at the connection point until the seal was imperfect. It had taken 8 days. On the 9th, the field had flickered twice when he flexed. On the 10th, it had held. On the 11th, he had decided it was good enough. He pressed the tray edge hard against the emitter node. The field sputtered and dropped on the left side. He rotated his wrist through the gap and used his free hand to press the node flat. The right side released a second later, a cascade failure, both sides drawing from the same circuit. He was free in 4 seconds. He did not stand up immediately. He listened. The guard's footsteps had not changed direction. The alarm pulse was getting louder now, which meant the fortress was moving its people toward the command areas. That was good. Confused organizations moved toward their centers, away from their edges. Dane's cell was near the edge. He moved to the door. The door had a manual release panel on the inside, not for prisoners but for emergency use to prevent anyone from being trapped in a sealed section during hull breach. It was a safety feature. Every serious ship had them. The Vathan's version was behind a small cover plate that required a tool to open. He used the tray edge. It took 40 seconds. The cover came off. The release was a simple mechanism, a lever, flush with the wall that he pressed with 2 fingers. The door opened. The corridor was empty. Dane moved left. He counted his steps. The junction he had seen through the open door 9 days ago was exactly where he had calculated 31 steps. He reached it, stopped, listened. Footsteps overhead, moving away. He went right at the junction and followed the ceiling-mounted conduit lines he had seen during that 9-second window. Communication lines went to relay hubs. Relay hubs were structural fixed points. In a Vathan fortress, the relay hub for the primary shield system would be adjacent to the engineering core, which was. He felt it through his feet, the deep vibration, below and to the left. He found a maintenance shaft access panel, worked it open, dropped inside. The shaft was tight and smelled of recycled air and warm electronics. He moved through it on his hands and knees, following the vibration the way an animal followed water, until the shaft opened into a small utility room filled with the kind of quiet, blinking equipment that nobody had to think about until it stopped working. The shield relay hub. Dane had not been trained as an engineer. He did not know Vathan systems in any technical sense, but he had spent 11 days listening to the shield frequency cycling, and he knew what 0.8 seconds looked like. He had felt it in the orbit pulse through the wall, had confirmed it through the hull contact signal. He had also, during those 11 days, thought very carefully about what a small change to one specific parameter would do to a repeating cycle. He did not need to understand the system. He needed to find the timing regulator. On human relay equipment, it was always the component that ran warmest, because timing regulators worked constantly and generated heat. He pressed his palm against each component housing in the room until he found it, second row, far right, noticeably warmer than its neighbors. He opened the housing. Inside was a physical adjustment dial, which he suspected existed because even advanced engineering required manual override capability. He turned it 17 degrees counterclockwise. He did not guess at the number. He had done the calculation in his cell, working backward from the numbers he had. 0.8 seconds, native cycle length, desired gap size. He needed at least 4 seconds. He estimated the dial adjustment at roughly 12 to 14 degrees per second of gap. He added a margin. He closed the housing and moved back to the shaft. Above him, the fortress was in full alert now. He could hear it in the way the hum changed, systems powering up, doors sealing, personnel moving at speed. He climbed back up through the shaft and found a junction corridor that the internal maps he had built told him led toward the docking arms. He pressed into an alcove and was still as a pair of Vathan soldiers ran past in the direction of the command deck. On the other side of the fortress's outer hull, in the dark of space, Admiral Voss's fleet was running hot. The navigator had been watching the shield frequency on the passive scan, waiting for the gap. At 0.8 seconds, it was theoretically possible but practically impossible to thread an attack through it. The window was too small for targeting systems to confirm and fire with acceptable accuracy. But the navigator was watching now as the gap stretched, extended, held open like a door someone was keeping their foot in. 4.2 seconds, repeating. "There he is," the navigator said, to no one in particular. The targeting solution for the fortress's engine block and communication array was already loaded. The strike package was designed to disable, not destroy. They needed the fortress intact and Dane alive. 3 ships fired in coordinated sequence, their shots threaded through the gap in the shield at precise intervals. The fortress shuddered. Inside the maintenance corridor, Dane felt the impact through his whole body, 3 distinct jolts close together, then a change in the ship's hum that meant the drives had gone offline. The lights flickered. Emergency lighting came up, red-tinted, casting the corridor in a deep crimson. He moved. Somewhere behind him, he heard Sir's voice, not directed at him, speaking to someone else, and the translation unit was not within range, but the tone was unmistakable. Sir had gone into his cell and found it empty. Dane did not stop moving. He reached the docking arm corridor and pressed himself into a doorway as 2 more guards passed. When they were gone, he continued forward, moving toward the exterior junction that the hull vibration pattern had told him connected the docking arm to the outer airlock section. The human boarding team would come through the airlock. He knew this because he knew how Voss ran operations, and Voss ran operations the way she ran everything, with the minimum force necessary and the maximum precision possible. He reached the junction. He waited. 40 seconds later, the outer airlock cycled. The door opened, and the first face he saw was not a soldier's. It was Warrant Officer Petra Hatch, who ran logistics for the boarding teams and who he had served alongside for 3 years, and who looked at him standing in the corridor with a completely steady expression that did not quite hide the fact that she was enormously relieved. "You look terrible," she said. "I found the relay hub," he said. "Forward it to engineering, they'll want to study it." She stared at him for half a second. Then she laughed, short, sharp and genuine, and motioned her team forward. Dane walked with them. He did not run. He had done enough running inside his own head to last some time. The fortress was quiet by the time the sun rose over nothing, because there was no sun and there was no morning, only the steady work of humans processing a captured Vothon installation in the dark of deep space. Dane sat in the medical bay of the carrier, eating his 3rd meal in 4 hours, while the ship's doctor worked through a checklist of the things that 11 days of reduced rations and disrupted sleep had done to him. The list was not short, but none of it was serious. The doctor said this in a tone that suggested she considered it remarkable. Dane did not think it was remarkable. He thought it was the result of preparation and discipline, and a particular trick he had learned from a wilderness instructor who had told him, once, that the human body would do almost anything the human mind asked of it, provided the mind was honest about what it was asking and consistent in how it asked. He had a bruise on his left wrist from the energy field emitter. That was the worst of it. Admiral Voss came to see him during the 2nd meal. She came in without ceremony and sat down across from him, and they looked at each other for a moment in the way that people who had worked together for a long time sometimes did, sharing a conversation that did not require words. Then she said, "You were 4 hours behind the secondary window." Dane said, "The guard rotation cycle was longer than I calculated from the initial data. I adjusted." Voss nodded. "The shield gap was clean. Engineering wants to know how you calculated the dial adjustment without any instruments." "Basic physics," he said, "and 11 days to think." She looked at him for a moment longer, and there was something in her expression that she did not say and he did not need to hear. Then she stood, because there was a great deal left to manage and she did not have the luxury of sitting still. "Get some sleep," she said. "I intend to," he said, and meant it fully. The political consequences arrived within 36 hours, moving faster than the news of the military action had. The Threll Accord, the 3 neutral species whose silence had alarmed Grell's political secretary, issued a joint statement within a day of the fortress's capture. The statement was careful and diplomatic in its language, but its meaning was not. They condemned the illegal detention of a military officer during a period of active negotiation. They withdrew their previously tentative support for any Vathan territorial claim in the Carvan system. They requested that the matter be reviewed by the broader Council of Neutral Voices, a body that existed precisely for situations where one power behaved in ways that threatened the stability of others. The Carvan system, the entire reason Grell had ordered the capture, the prize that was supposed to be secured while humanity was frozen in diplomatic anxiety, was now the subject of a formal investigation. The Vathan claim was suspended pending review. It would remain suspended for a long time, because investigations that started under these circumstances did not tend to move quickly, and the political goodwill that Grell had spent 4 months carefully building had been spent in 11 days. Grell was in custody aboard a human vessel. He had been taken without resistance, because the fortress's command deck had been sealed after the strike disabled its drive systems, and there was nowhere to go. He had not spoken since his arrest except through his legal advocate, and his advocate was currently dealing with the fact that 3 different neutral bodies wanted to hear testimony. Ron, for his part, was in a separate holding area. He had been cooperative in a formal sense. He had not resisted boarding, had directed his remaining soldiers to stand down, and had provided the standard identification documentation without prompting. He was a professional, and professionals did not make the situation worse when the situation was already decided. But when the human officer processing his transfer asked if he had any requests, Ron had made one. He wanted to speak with Rourke. Dane came to the holding area on the second day. He was still moving with the slight careful quality of someone who had recently asked a great deal of their body, but he was steady. He sat down across the partition from Ron and waited. Ron studied him. This close, without the filter of rank or situation, the human looked unremarkable in the specific way that genuinely capable people often did. There was nothing about his face or his frame that declared itself. He looked like a man who might work on machinery, or teach mathematics, or manage logistics for a mid-sized organization. He looked like someone you would not notice in a crowd. Ron had been in 3 wars. He knew exactly what that meant. "I want to ask you something," Ron said. Dane said, "Go ahead." "At any point," Ron said carefully, "did you believe you would not get out?" Dane thought about this. Not in the way a person thought about something they were trying to construct, in the way a person thought about something they were actually examining. The silence lasted long enough that Ron wondered if he had overstepped. Then Dane said, "Yes, on the 4th day. I had a bad few hours. I didn't know if the fleet had picked up my position, and I didn't know if the hull contact signal was carrying, and I was running on less sleep than I needed, and there was a point where all of those things arrived at the same time." Ron waited. "I gave it about 3 hours," Dane said. "The feeling. Then I put it down and went back to counting." "You gave it 3 hours," Ron said slowly. "You have to let it exist," Dane said. "If you pretend it isn't there, it gets loud. If you let it be there for a while, it quiets down. Then you can work." Ron absorbed this. "We do not have a concept for that," he said. "In Vathan psychology, fear is either present or absent. You manage it toward absence." "That's the difference," Dane said. He stood, nodded once in a way that was not unfriendly, and left. Ron sat with the silence for a long time afterward. He had been right, earlier, that the human fleet's stillness was not inaction, but he had not understood the full shape of it. It was not simply that the fleet had been preparing while Grell thought it was paralyzed. It was that the man in the cell had been preparing simultaneously, running his own operation from inside a place that was supposed to hold him. And the 2 things had been coordinated not through active communication, but through a shared understanding of what each side would do, built over years of working together, tested in harder places than this one. You could not build leverage against that. You could not find a pressure point in a machine that used pressure as fuel. Somewhere in the Vathan Intelligence Archive, a classification report was being updated by an analyst who was choosing her words with great care. The section on human psychology in captivity had been sparse before this incident. A handful of historical cases, some theoretical models, and a general conclusion that humans responded to imprisonment the way most species did, with eventual deterioration of resistance under sustained pressure. The analyst deleted that conclusion. She thought for a long time about what to replace it with. Finally, she wrote, "Human subjects in captivity should not be considered passive assets. Historical data indicates they will attempt to operate as active agents regardless of physical constraint. Standard leverage models do not apply. Risk of reverse operational control is high." She paused. Then underneath it, she added a note marked for senior review only in smaller text, almost an afterthought. "Do not take them prisoner. It does not go the way you expect." She submitted the report, closed the file, and made herself a drink in the small preparation unit beside her desk. Outside her window, the narrow one that faced the loading bay of the archive facility, she could see one of the transport ships that had come in from the Carven sector. It was a human ship, recognizable by the slight mechanical irregularity in its drive signal, the roughness that came from an engineering philosophy that valued function over precision, that built things to work, and then worked them hard and fixed them when they broke and expected them to keep going. She watched it for a while. Then she went